Can you really make someone think about you? What if you could picture someone in your mind, focus on them for a few minutes every night, and somehow they suddenly texted you? Sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly what happened to Lauren Kessler. She was folding laundry at 9:47 on a Tuesday night when her phone buzzed. It was him, Eli, a guy she hadn't heard from in 11 months. And the first thing he said was, "This is going to sound weird, but I've been thinking about you all day." Lauren froze, because for the last 3 nights, she'd been doing something she'd seen in a manifestation video. She closed her eyes, pictured his face, imagined her phone lighting up with his name, and repeated one sentence. "Eli's thinking about me right now." 14 minutes a night, 3 nights, and then he texted. So was this manifestation? Was it just coincidence? Or can our thoughts actually influence the people we can't even see? That's the question we're going to explore. Now, I want to slow down right here, because this is exactly the kind of moment where most videos on this topic go one of two ways. Either they tell you that you now have proof that thoughts really do travel, that you reached across the distance and pulled him back to you, or they roll their eyes and tell you it's just a coincidence. Nothing more. Go back to your life. I don't think either answer is completely honest, and I think Lauren's story is actually a much better door into this question than most people give it credit for. So let's go back to the beginning, because there's more to this than the text message. Lauren and Eli had dated for 8 months, 2 years earlier. It wasn't a bad breakup. There was no cheating, no blow-up, no screaming in a parking lot. It ended quietly, the way a lot of good relationships actually end. Eli got a job offer in Denver, and Lauren, 26 at the time, wasn't ready to leave her life in Ohio to follow someone she'd only been dating for 8 months. They both said it made sense. They both cried anyway. In her car, in the parking lot of the restaurant where he told her. For the first few months after, she was fine. Genuinely fine. Or close enough to it. She dated a little. She deleted his number. And then she found it again in an old group chat and didn't delete it a second time. She told herself that was normal. Just closure she hadn't quite finished. But somewhere around the 1-year mark, she started noticing something she didn't love admitting to herself. She still thought about him on his birthday. She still couldn't hear the song from their first date without her chest doing something small and complicated. It was a fairly forgettable song. Nothing special about it, except that it happened to be playing in his car the night they first kissed. And sometimes, at 2 a.m, Lauren opened his Instagram just to see if anything had changed. Nothing ever had. He didn't post much. So when she started manifesting him thinking about her, she wasn't starting from nothing. She wasn't casting a hook into an empty lake. She was reactivating something that had never actually gone quiet in the first place. It had just gone underground. That detail matters more than it might seem, because psychology has actually looked at something similar. It's called the availability heuristic. It's the tendency for your brain to judge how likely or important something is based on how easily examples of it come to mind. Eli was already easy for Lauren's mind to reach. He wasn't buried under years of forgetting. He was maybe 2 inches under the surface at most. 3 nights of deliberately picturing him, didn't necessarily create a new connection out of thin air. It may have sharpened an old one that had been sitting there quietly the entire time, half lit, waiting for a reason to come back into focus. Here's a small, almost funny detail Lauren mentioned when she told me this story. On night 2 of her 14 minutes, she caught herself mid-visualization thinking, "This is insane. I feel like I'm casting a spell in a Reddit thread." She almost stopped. She didn't. She pushed through the eye roll and kept going, because some part of her, underneath the embarrassment, actually wanted this to be real. That wanting matters. We'll come back to it. Now here's the question worth asking honestly. Did her thinking about him cause him to text? Or was there something else going on entirely? Because Eli, it turns out, had his own version of that week. When Lauren eventually asked him what made him reach out that specific night, he said something that had nothing to do with her thoughts reaching through space to find him. He'd seen an old mutual friend post a photo from a camping trip the three of them had taken together 2 summers earlier. Lauren was in the photo, laughing at something off camera, hair a mess, completely unaware anyone was even taking the picture. It had been sitting in his feed for 2 days before he finally worked up the nerve to text her. 2 days of low-grade nostalgia, building quietly in the background of an otherwise ordinary week, before it finally turned into an actual message he hit send on. So which is it? Did Lauren's 14 minutes a night reach across 300 miles and cause a photo to surface in someone else's feed? Did they somehow cause Priya, a woman Lauren hadn't spoken to in over a year, to decide that particular week was the week to post an old camping photo? That's a much harder claim to stand behind once you say it out loud like that. What's easier to stand behind is something almost as strange, in its own quieter way. 2 people who had genuinely mattered to each other were both, independently, circling back toward the same memory in the same window of time. For reasons that had partly nothing to do with each other at all. Coincidence, sure, but maybe not meaningless coincidence, just not proof of telepathy either. Something in between, which is usually where the truth actually lives. Even though somewhere in between never makes for a good thumbnail. There's something else worth naming here, and it's a little humbling if you sit with it. Confirmation bias doesn't just affect what we remember after the fact. It affects what we even go looking for in the first place. And it affects what stories get told at all. If Eli hadn't texted that week, Lauren likely wouldn't be telling this story right now. She wouldn't be counting up all the times manifestation didn't work. Because nobody counts those. Nobody makes a video about the guy who never texted back. Nobody posts the 14 minutes a night that led nowhere. We only ever hear the hits, never the long, quiet list of misses sitting underneath them. Invisible, unremarkable, forgotten by the very people who lived them. And that's worth sitting with, because it changes how impressive the whole thing looks once you zoom out. Somewhere out there is a version of Lauren, maybe a slightly younger her, maybe a friend of hers, maybe you, who spent 3 nights or 3 months thinking intensely about someone who never reached out at all. She's not making a video about it either. She just moved on. A little disappointed, quietly, and nobody ever heard about that story. because stories that don't work out don't usually get told twice. So does that mean this whole idea is nothing? Just selective memory and old feelings resurfacing at a convenient moment, dressed up in spiritual language to feel more meaningful than it actually is? I don't think it's quite that simple either. And here's where I think the more honest, more spiritual perspective actually deserves real space. People who believe seriously in this kind of manifestation rarely describe it as forcing a specific person to think a specific thought against their will. Most describe something closer to alignment. The idea that focusing your energy and intention on a person or an outcome puts you into a state where connection becomes more likely, more welcomed, more possible, rather than mechanically guaranteed. Some traditions go further than that. They believe that genuine, focused, emotional energy can actually be felt by another person, even across real distance. Science hasn't found a reliable way to prove that. So I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make this video feel tidier. But this isn't some new idea invented for a social media trend. Long before manifestation had a hashtag attached to it, people were praying for someone specific to think of them, lighting candles for someone to come back, whispering a name into the dark, hoping it traveled somewhere, different language, different generation after generation, but a startlingly similar impulse underneath all of it. Here's what I keep coming back to, though, and it might be the most interesting part of this whole story. Lauren didn't just think about Eli in some vague, drifting way. She sat down, on purpose, for 14 minutes a night, 3 nights in a row, and deliberately revisited a connection she had never actually closed the door on. That's not passive daydreaming. That's a decision made consciously, night after night, even while part of her felt a little ridiculous doing it. And decisions like that tend to do something real in a person's life, whether or not the universe is actively listening in on the other end. Because here's the thing about deliberately holding someone in your attention like that. You don't just change what's happening inside your own head. You often, eventually, change what happens outside your head too. The text you finally work up the nerve to send. The old photo you decide to like instead of scrolling right past it. The small, brave, slightly embarrassing, entirely ordinary risk of reaching towards someone you've been quietly missing. Lauren never actually reached out to Eli first. Not in this particular version of the story. But it's worth wondering whether 3 nights of sitting with him that closely, that deliberately, made her just slightly more ready, more open, more emotionally available to answer when he finally did reach out. There's a strange kind of evidence for this hiding in something Lauren told me almost as an afterthought. She said that before those 3 nights, if Eli had texted her out of nowhere, her first instinct probably would have been defensive, a little guarded, maybe even annoyed. The way you get when someone reopens a door you'd finally mostly closed. But because she'd spent those 3 nights sitting with him on purpose, actually letting herself feel how much she still cared instead of pushing it down. When his name lit up her screen, her first feeling wasn't defensiveness. It was relief. That's not nothing. That's a completely different emotional starting point for whatever came next between them. And nothing about that shift required the universe to do anything at all. It just required her to stop lying to herself for 14 minutes a night. Maybe that's the real question hiding underneath this whole idea. Not whether thoughts can travel through space and land in somebody else's head on command, like a message sent through some invisible Wi Fi connecting two nervous systems, but whether the version of you who's finally honest enough to sit still and admit who you're still thinking about is already, quietly, a slightly different person than the one who never lets herself go there at all. A person a little more open, a little more ready, a little easier to reach, even if nothing outside of you has changed one bit. Lauren and Eli have been talking again for a few months now, slowly, carefully. Long phone calls instead of rushed texts. No promises made yet, no grand declarations, nothing you'd film for a highlight reel. Neither of them has said the word manifestation out loud since that first text. And honestly, at this point, I don't think it matters anymore whether it was fate or coincidence or an old camping photo surfacing in a feed at exactly the right moment, or some tangled combination of all three that nobody, including Lauren, will ever be able to fully untangle. What matters is that she finally let herself want him back, out loud, even if the only person who initially heard it was her. Alone, in a dark bedroom, 14 minutes at a time. So maybe, before you spend tonight trying to make somebody else think of you, the better question is this: who have you been quietly thinking about that you still haven't let yourself admit out loud? Because maybe the manifestation was never really about them at all. Maybe it was never about bending someone else's mind toward you from 300 miles away. Maybe the real shift happens in those 14 minutes when you finally stop pretending you don't still care. If this one hit close to home, tell me who came to mind while you were watching. And if you like stories that sit right at the edge of psychology and something we can't fully explain, stay close, because that's exactly where Universe Allow lives.